Hello and welcome to AM Prime here on WESN Content Capital. I'm Keaton Shaw. Thank you very much for joining me this morning, Wednesday, the 7th of June, 2023, or to some, the first Friday of the week. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me this morning as we start this edition of the program. My first guest this morning is joining me to speak about the resilience of micro, small and medium business enterprises here in Trinidad and Tobago following a survey that was conducted. And that is the Chief Executive Officer of the Employers Consultative Association, Mr. Ronald Ramlogan. He's with us via Zoom. Good morning, sir.
Hi, good morning, Keaton. Good morning to your listeners and to your viewers. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, sir. My first question, the role of the ECA as it relates to fostering a business community or a business ecosystem that is in creating resilience for micro, small and medium business enterprises. What would you say that is?
So the ECA is a representative association of employers in Trinidad and Tobago, and we are in fact the largest association of employers. And by virtue of that, we do have unique representation at the international level with organizations like the ILO, the International Labour Organization, and the IOE, the International Organization of Employers. So as a representative association, I think we are well placed, given the fact that our membership spans a wide spectrum of industries and sectors, businesses of all sizes, from micro businesses all the way up to large multinationals, to be able to bring like-minded businesses together. In some ways, we have a good understanding of those types of risks, such as human capital risks, for example, that businesses face. Given that industrial relations is the reason we were founded in the first place 63 years ago. And over the years, we've developed a unique understanding of many of those issues that businesses face, employers in particular, and risk mitigation strategies that they should employ. So we are well placed to bring a community of businesses and employers together to share knowledge, to discuss issues, to learn from each other, and use our place in the socioeconomic society spectrum to also bring important knowledge and information to businesses, particularly SMEs, who, let's face it, they've been struggling in many ways since 2020.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because this particular survey, this research report, Perspectives on Business Resilience in Trinidad and Tobago, precisely what are the reasons that the ECA saw it necessary to actually produce such a report?
Yeah, so I mean, it was all sort of occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic, and there's no reason really to get into all of the issues that we all faced in the last 3 years, particularly in 2020 and 2021. Suffice it to say, in 2020, early on, we thought it was important to engage our membership to get a sense of what their needs were specific to the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course, all of the measures that were in place at that time, restricting a lot of movements and business activity, necessary measures, of course. And it was during that initial exercise, we saw very quickly that many businesses really just were not prepared to deal with the kind of disruption that we were facing at that time. Mind you, it was unprecedented in terms of its scale and its impact, but the ability of anyone really to predict the next crisis is virtually impossible, right? Mm-hmm. But your ability to prepare for it is not. And that preparation we saw was lacking. And therefore we thought we just some months after that, we had an opportunity to sit on a global panel that the ILO put together to do a peer review of a new business resilience program that they developed. And they brought together professionals from across the globe, including the ECA, who was the industrial relations and HR professional on that global committee. And based on what we saw in our original survey, at that time, I think about 70% of our respondents did not have a business continuity plan in place, and a large majority were struggling significantly. So we made representation at that global committee, and the decision to launch a pilot sustainable and resilient enterprise program was taken to be launched in Iran and in Iran, yes, and in South Africa. And we felt that it was necessary to make representation given what we saw in our initial intervention with membership. And it was accepted. So we were fortunate enough to have this new ILO training package that was developed, peer-reviewed, and was subject to a global scoping study to also undergo a pilot exercise here in Trinidad and Tobago in late 2021. And as part of that exercise, we took the opportunity to conduct this research for a couple of reasons. One is because we are all aware data is sometimes an issue in Trinidad and Tobago. And we saw an opportunity to add some data to decision making. But also we did not only want to present a training, but we also wanted to get a better understanding of where our business community was in terms of their preparedness to business resilience, what were their understanding, what was their understanding of business resilience, and what was our ecosystem in terms of from government all the way down to facilitate business resilience practices or investments in business resilience practices, and hence we conducted this research exercise.
Well, I noticed from the survey, reading the report, there were three main challenges: operational resilience, organizational resilience, and technical resilience, dealing with technology in particular. Precisely out of these three, though you've labeled them as the main challenges, what would you say more focus needs to be upon? Because if you take a look at operational resilience, it looks at finance, human resourcing, etc. And coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, certainly we know all aspects of that was definitely affected. But technology resilience, as the world is continuing to evolve, as new business practices come out, and as we incorporate more technology, new technology into businesses, are we prepared here in Trinidad and Tobago for that revolution?
So that's $1 million question, right? And the answer really is not as simple as we would think. Yes, there's organizational resilience, there's operational resilience, there's technological resilience. But we also have to understand that we do not know what the next crisis or disruption will be. And therefore, if we are talking about investing in business resilience practices, systems, or business models, or even policies at the national level or the organizational level, we really need to be able to touch each of these dimensions almost equally. What our survey found was that many of the respondents, or a large majority of the respondents at that time, were more focused on operational resilience for obvious reasons, okay? So this survey was conducted late 2021, November, December, into 2022, March to October, I believe. And so COVID-19 was top of mind for most persons, for most businesses. And that included having to grapple with things like remote work, and extended leave requests for quarantine situations or those who may have contracted COVID-19. Some of them would have undergone several rounds of mandatory lockdowns or restrictions on business activities, and therefore the focus on operational resilience, meaning financial matters, human resource matters, as the case may be. So while that may be, really, it is necessary really to focus, to place some focus on each of those dimensions almost equally, because of the uncertainty that we face in terms of disruptions. And I'll give you an example. In 2022, no one could have really foresaw that we would have had a nationwide blackout for several hours. And I remember at our own office at the ECA, just before that, a few weeks before that, we invested in a machine that allowed us to keep our internet connection and our electricity up and running during that blackout. And it wasn't something that we foresaw. It happened, and thankfully we were prepared. And so really, it is, as I said, it's important to place equal focus, I think, on each of those areas. Mm-hmm. Technological resilience, I must mention in particular, now that we are seeing this exponential growth in technologies, particularly in artificial intelligence, robotics, and other move towards remote work or hybrid forms of work. And therefore, cyber attacks and security threats are now a very present danger, particularly for businesses. And we've seen some of that happen in recent times. I recall Massey, for example, having an issue with that in terms of a cyber attack. And so that is becoming much more important, I think. Mm-hmm.
So let's focus on one moment, one aspect of operational resilience, since you've mentioned that that has been the greatest focus from the majority of MSMEs. That being said, there is an understanding, at least, of the economical side of things, especially coming out of COVID-19 and the recovery process. But one of the greater things that we do not often hear about is the human resource aspect, and whether or not there is, I suppose, enough human resources or specialized human resources in Trinidad and Tobago to fill the gaps and voids, especially coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic? Or is that an area that still needs great focus and attention?
It does, and that's one of the reasons why, I mean, in our study, we acknowledge the fact that that the enabling environment for SMEs, particularly in terms of government support, is fairly robust, but it is fragmented in many ways. And one of the issues that we continue to have really is that mismatch between skills that businesses need and skills that are, that emerge out of our education and training systems. And now with the quote-unquote future of work here, and the direction that we are heading in terms of technology and the need to change business models and business processes, I think there still continues to be that disconnect that needs to be addressed. In some ways, that's a policy issue. In other ways, it requires, I think, collective dialogue with businesses, with labor, social partners, as the case may be. Bring everyone to the table so that we can find solutions that really satisfy the needs of, in the first instance, those who consume the labor that is being supplied. And then, in turn, our national community would ultimately be the ones that benefit.
Mm-hmm. As part of the findings of this particular report, the membership of who was asked to participate in this particular survey, the respondents, did the respondents overall, the majority, have a feeling of confidence, I suppose, that the business community was prepared to implement new strategies that are necessary and required for business resilience?
I would say no. I think, and again, particularly when it comes to our micro, small, and medium enterprises and MSMEs, and those, by definition, would include any company that employs between 6 and 50 employees. There was some understanding of the concept, and in many cases, we saw some respondents indicating that they did have safety plans or some type of emergency plans in place. Mind you, a good part of the respondents came from the manufacturing and energy sector, or the oil and gas sector. who also already has a fairly well-developed OSH system that they have to adhere to. But we also saw, as I said, particularly with SMEs, there was a lack of know-how and capacity in many cases, including financial capacity, to implement resilience practices. And to be honest, some really were just focused on day-to-day operations. Mm-hmm. And so the time and the time or the financial investment that it would take to get a more resilient sort of structure in place, to train or to build capacity in their management team, as the case may be. For many, it was more important just to focus on running the business. And therefore, while there was awareness of some resources that were available, a good portion said that they were aware, for example, that the ECA does provide good training when it comes to things like business resilience, and generally in terms of our human resource and industrial relations programs. They were aware, but again, the capacity to take advantage of it in many cases, just it was lacking. And we saw things like technology, very low adoption rates in many businesses, and in some cases, as I said, it has to do with the resources that are available to them. In other cases, it's a policy issue, as I said, in terms of, maybe a lack of incentives to invest in certain types of practices. Mm-hmm. And again, some disconnect in terms of our national approach to how we promote business resilience. We have a lot of different agencies doing a lot of different things. But there was no unified policy, and generally in our society, we take the national policies take lead, and then we follow with our own responses as we go down.
You just mentioned there's no unified policy, and that generally it's national policy that takes the front. Is the existing framework of such policy adequate? Is it sufficient, especially with focus on business resilience for MSMEs?
Yeah, so there was a policy we found that was developed by the former Ministry of Labor and Small and Micro Enterprise Development, I believe, on SMEs. That was a 2015-2016 document, which is currently under review, I think, to be updated. And one of the things that we saw was that just the term resilience did not even appear in that document. And so we thought it was necessary to indicate that it was important to make business resilience, a central part of that particular document. Now, and there has been a lot of good work, I think, that has taken place in recent times. I mean, NETCO, for example, they do a lot of good work in terms of mentorship and microfinancing under the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service. And then the Ministry of Finance launched an SME marketplace recently with the stock exchange, including the SME mentorship program. There are other things that are being done in pockets. But when we talk about a unified policy, we talk about, and in the business world, this is what we do, right? We have a mission and vision, and then we have a strategy that says what we want to achieve and our objectives and targets that says how we will achieve it. And then we monitor that over time, we measure performance, we make adjustments when things don't go right, and we get to where we want to get to. And that is the kind of thinking I think that we need from the top down.
Mm-hmm. In particular, is there a need to enhance a government's position as it relates to fostering a more resilient environment, whether it be through the legislation, as you've just mentioned, or is there perhaps a need on both sides, whether it be from the government's position as well as the business community's position, to have a greater a sensitization and awareness campaign of measures that will allow for greater resilience?
I think it goes beyond that. So yes, government has a role, obviously, as leaders of our nation. Businesses have a role. They have their own responsibility to secure their businesses, and we all know when businesses do well, we all do well. Okay, the government earns more in taxes. Businesses can then invest in more job creation and innovation. But then there's also a role for other organizations. Take organizations like the ECA, for example. We started the conversation talking about the role of the ECA in terms of fostering this resilience mindset. And there are a number of business associations in Trinidad and Tobago, I think, that also have a role to play in terms of sensitizing their members and increasing that awareness in terms of the importance of, well, first of all, understanding, and then the importance of investing in business resilience practices and strategies, and providing tools as the case may be. Even at a personal level, when we talk about professional resilience, we talk about education, training, and lifelong learning. So when things are tough, and unfortunately, retrenchments have to take place, or businesses have to resize. That sort of continuous training at a personal level and investment in training and retraining and reskilling helps us to be resilient in the labor market as well. Mm-hmm. So I think everyone has a role to play in some way, at some level. We just need to be able to define that clearly and ensure that everyone does, in fact, do what they're responsible for.
The community, the business community, the government, they all have a role to play. And I actually like how you just ended your last response, that we need to clearly define these roles and responsibilities, a greater cohesion, I suppose, in trying to create a greater environment or ecosystem for business resilience. Mr. Ramlogan, I want to thank you very much for your time this morning, for joining me, and for sharing this information with us, especially as it relates to the results of the survey, the findings from the survey, and going forward, recommendations as to how we can improve the existing environment. Thank you very much, sir, for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. And just to say in closing, we do have a training intervention that will benefit businesses. It teaches businesses 9 resilience practices and how to develop a business resilience strategy. So for those who are interested, they can contact the ECA or check out our website.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for the ECA for doing their part in this entire situation. But for now, so we'll have to end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Take care. That was Mr. Ronald Ramlogan, the Chief Executive Officer of the Employers Consultative Association, joining me this morning as we speak about business resilience for MSMEs here in Trinidad and Tobago. And a great way to end that conversation is highlighting the fact that it's just not one entity with a greater responsibility, but rather it encompasses all factors within any environment, whether it be the business community, the government, or the population by large, that has a role to play here in TNT. Ladies and gentlemen, we take a break here on AM Prime. When we return, we'll get into some more conversations this morning. Stay tuned to the program.
people really want to know, what about me? Where do I fit?
Yes.
What is in the ride for me in terms of a better Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm pleased to shed some light on that.
The purpose of bail is to ensure your attendance at court. That's it. It is not punitive, it is not rehabilitative.
We, the police officers, we are professional, and we are here for whenever the survivor is ready to come forward.
We have the right to private and family life, the right to religious freedoms and beliefs and thoughts and expression. But these rights are not absolute. Certain rights can be limited.
The law is to govern the whole, it's for all of us in public.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
What's the best way to grab the attention of viewers? Please exercise more patience. You have to be kidding me.
Doing what we do best.
I'll say at the very least it's a conspiracy of laziness against the people.
Join me, Keaton Shaw.
And me, Sean Michael Small, for Talking Point.
Weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
We go in depth on the trending issues and engage the most controversial newsmakers
as we get them to account to the people for their actions.
You can't go to the government with nothing. You can't go to cabinet with an empty hand, with a wish.
I'm glad that we're having this a sober, mature discussion.
In the present situation, I expect a continuation of the chaos.
Join us for the discussion, Mondays to Fridays,
only on WESN,
the content capital.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Welcome back to AM Prime here on WESN Content Capital. Thank you for staying with us this morning. I now welcome the manager of the Best Village program, Ms. Loris Leasing, as well as a Physical Education and Sports Officer at the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, Mr. Ronson Hackshaw. Ladies and gentlemen, is with us via Zoom. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Well, thank you guys very much for joining me this morning as we speak about the Sports Community Program 2023 as a part of the Prime Minister's Best Village competition, Best Village program. Let's start with you, Ms. Lee Singh. Historically speaking, the value of this particular competition, how is it promoting healthy community development? Is it just about competition as well as entertainment, or does it go beyond that?
Well, at Best Village, all of our programs are aimed at integrating our society. Best Village has done a lot to expose our culture to each other so we can appreciate and admire it. And we're doing the same thing in this collaboration with sport. We have different communities from all over this island coming together to play games together. It might sound light, but it's not light because you have people from, you know, everywhere, every walk of life, every social class, interacting and having good camaraderie and good relationship. And I think that goes a long way.
So essentially, it's an opportunity for all of Trinidad and Tobago to come together. So we see more of a united TNT.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it.
Mr. Hackshaw, bring you now into the conversation. Through this particular program, now with the inclusion of sport, would this promote healthier, more positive energies?
Yes, of course. Sport in daily life is very important for persons in Trinidad and Tobago. Physical activity is very important. It's good for well-being for persons involved in sport. And with these community sport festivals, we have the opportunity for those persons who are inactive for a very long time to get involved and participate in friendly competition and participate in the sport they love.
Oh, the sport they love, boy. This sounds like a lot of fun, and a lot is being achieved while doing so. But Mr. Hackshaw, beyond just that, how could we use sport as a tool for actually positive influence upon the youth here in Trinidad and Tobago, especially with focus of all that is taking place, which is not necessarily positive, the opportunity to utilize sports as a positive influence here in Trinidad and Tobago. Could you speak about that, please?
Yes, sport these days is a major tool in distracting a lot of the youths to get active, have some sort of positive, set a positive goal in terms of participating in football, in cricket, in basketball. Relieve that tension, that energy, and put it somewhere where they can profit or be beneficial for them in the long run to represent one, they represent Trinidad and Tobago, represent the region, make their families proud, you know, change their lives in terms of the social interactions they have in their community, be an icon within their community in terms of participating in sport, to be acknowledged and represent Trinidad and Tobago one day.
Actually, that's a very good point, because representing Trinidad and Tobago is one way that I think many a times when we see TNT come together, it's for sporting competitions in particular, you see a lot of camaraderie taking place there. Miss Leasing, the participation of programs such as the Prime Minister's Best Village competition, this sports community program, what has the participation been like across TNT?
Well, we have a lot of interest. A lot of people are registering online. We have our Best Village officers talking to their different groups to see if they do want to participate. And so far, you know, we've been met with a lot of positives. We had a great turnout at Mandela Park last Saturday for the St. George West preliminaries, and we're looking forward to a good turnout from St. Patrick East and West at Irwin Park this Saturday.
I'm repping for St. George. I'm repping for St. George. But you know what is quite interesting is that people might think that there is no correlation between sports, between competitions such as the Best Village competition and community development. Because as we started this conversation, is it all about just entertainment and competition? And thus far, you all have done a pretty good job at actually, you know, that myth, just throwing it out the window. But in particular, at-risk populations, avenues for safety, is this just one that is being channeled, allowing at-risk populations to find a sense of safety and security?
Well, I mean, you know, at the end of the day, if persons who might be considered at risk and so come out and participate in the games, that's wonderful. I don't know if we're necessarily focused on at-risk people, but I'll tell you this. I've never been to a concentration class. I've never been to a conflict management class when I was in school. But if it's anything helps you with conflict management skills, it's playing sports. Nobody have time for you to argue on the pitch. You know, we resolve conflicts quickly, we move on quickly. I think that's an important lesson. as well as playing sport, the focus, the concentration you have to block your opponent, to get to the top of the racing, all of those things. And then you're also using your body, something that too few of us are in touch with. So I think that Best Village and sports are covering all bases with this competition.
And you mentioned something earlier as well, which clicked in my head, and that is the opportunity for people of various backgrounds, because you're allowing different communities to come together. This promotes diversity and inclusion, because it will allow for people throughout Trinidad and Tobago of different backgrounds to come together. There is greater harmony. There is great. I mean, we've used the term camaraderie many a times, but even families with different racial backgrounds, individuals coming together, it allows for a connection for a common goal. Would you say that?
Absolutely. I mean, as my colleague here would testify, he being much more into the sport than myself, sport brings people together. Anytime Trinidad and Tobago qualifies for anything, it's not just the people who play the sport, it's the whole country comes together. So it's a strong and powerful force, and we're happy to be a part of this collaboration.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Hackshaw, it certainly brings us together, but if you support any other football team other than Manchester United, I think we're probably going to have some stiff competition here. But, okay. Mr. Hackshaw, in particular, I know we focused a lot on community development, but it goes beyond this. It also promotes a healthy environment physically as well. I mean, most recently, we're speaking about most nations in the 21st century are suffering from an epidemic of obesity, diabetes, etc. This inclusion of physical education is one way that we're taking steps to counteract such epidemic and create a healthier population now and for years to come. Would you say that's the case?
Yes, that's correct. If you look at the government's policy in terms of the ministry's policy, where we look at total participation in sport for all. So it doesn't matter your background, your activity level, everybody's included in this program or this community sport program. Whether it be you're a stay-at-home mom, you're working 2 jobs, you don't have time to come out and do any physical activity. These programs are for you to come out, be healthy, look at your well-being, participate, come out with your community, encourage your children, your friends, your family members to be active. And this goes a long way in terms of the well-being of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago in participating in these sorts of activities.
Overall, ladies and gentlemen, I can say that the genesis of our conversation this morning is that this initiative and all aspects of it creates a healthy environment overall for Trinidad and Tobago and for its people. Ms. Leasing, if you can just tell us precisely when this is taking place, and I know you mentioned the different districts and areas coming together. Where is this taking place and when is it taking place?
Well, we're at different places over the next couple months. Throughout June, on the 10th, we'll be at Irwin Park in Sipario for St. Patrick East and West. On the 24th of June, we're going to be at, I can't remember, but it's Victoria East and West. And then in, where is it, Bronson?
Princestown, I believe.
Yes, Princestown for Victoria East and West. And then in July, we have 3 other competitions going on around the country. And then we have a big final in August at the Hazel Crawford Stadium.
Oh, wonderful. How does one register to be a part of this program?
Well, you can reach out to the Best Village unit or the sport unit at the Ministry of Community Development, the Ministry of Sport, and Community Development. And, let us know that you're interested. You can reach out to the Best Village officers. We have offices all over the country. You can find the offices and the contact on our ministry website. and the flyers are in circulation on our social media as well. So you just have to follow us, and you can find out where everything is happening. Give us a call, send us an email, send us a WhatsApp, and jump in.
And what about prizes? Because everybody in Trinidad and Tobago wants to know mostly about prizes. What can I win if I'm successful as part of this competition?
Well, the final winners do receive some cash prizes. We have trophies. We have small items that for persons who are participating in the novelty games and the athletics. So it's a lot of fun. The March Pass is a big part of the competition, especially for Best Village, the Dance Pass. That's going to be a lot of fun, and there's a good prize for that as well.
Mr. Hackshaw, as we conclude this conversation, and thank you both for joining me this morning and highlighting this, as the Physical Education and Sports Officer, just if there was one thing you'd like to say to all of Trinidad and Tobago to encourage them to come out and be a part of this, what would you say?
I would say come out. The ministry has a lot of programs going on in the sport department. We have the Pink Rain campaign, we have the SHAPE program, the community sport festivals are under the SHAPE program. I used to be collaborating with Best Village for this community sport festival. I want persons to come out, participate in all the programs the ministry is having, and benefit from the knowledge and the education being taught so that you can carry on this information to your friends and your family members and benefit as a person from Trinidad and Tobago with the various amount of programs the Ministry of Sport and Community Development has to offer.
Well, Ms. Leasing, Mr. Hackshaw, I'll tell you what, following August final, I think we need to have another conversation to dissect the competition and analyze it even further. But for now, this is where we're going to have to end it. Thank you very much for sharing the information with us this morning, particularly on how those can register and what they can look forward to for the work done at the ministry and for both you, lady and gentlemen, for the work that you're doing for promoting community development. Thank you very much to you and to your team.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, and thanks for helping us spread the word.
Certainly. Well, have a great day, and cheers to the competition ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we take a break here on AM Prime. When we return, we get some regional updates this morning. Stay tuned.
Did you know that polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PCOS, is one of the most common issues faced by women of reproductive age in Trinidad and Tobago?
So we see more patients with polycystic if they're obese, but there are the small-belled patients who also have polycystic ovaries.
What other treatment options are there available for these girls?
WhatsApp Doc every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity, from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through. Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
The best birthday gifts are at thebesttoys.com. Shop for the best brands you love at the best prices, like VTech, Leapfrog, Fisher-Price, Play-Doh, Hot Wheels, Barbie, Cocomelon, LOL, Baby Alive, Crayola. Visit us in-store at Forces Flagship MacBean. Shop online now at thebesttoys.com. Order via call or WhatsApp at 32DBEST to order. And remember, we have the best toys at the best prices.
Welcome back to AM Prime, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for staying with us. Let's get into some regional updates, starting with the Republic of Guyana. Voting in the 2023 local government elections actually began last week Friday by members of the disciplined forces who are casting their ballots ahead of official elections day on June 12th. Just bear in mind, a month later is Trinidad and Tobago's local government election, as announced yesterday, August 14th. In the meantime, there is focus on what's taking place in Guyana. So let's take a look at this report.
The 2023 local government elections got underway on Friday, and the chairperson of the Ghana Elections Commission, GCOM, Justice Retired Claudette Singh, says she is satisfied with the smooth flow of things thus far. Singh visited and observed the voting process at the Ghana Defence Force GDF base camp Ghana and the prison service in Georgetown.
I'm satisfied with what is going on right now and how they're moving very slowly. Well, it takes time, but they're getting there.
Justice Singh was accompanied by Deputy Chief Elections Officer Anil Giddens, who noted that the voting process is in line with GCOM's work plan.
So there are 75 locations across Guyana in all the administrative regions.
Chief of Staff of GDF, Brigadier Omar Khan, told the media at Base Camp Ghana that GDF members voted at 23 locations, and based on reports, the process went smoothly.
In our total voting population, we have 2,799 ranks who are expected to vote today. And the uniqueness of the military and the joint services is that we have ranks disposition across many locations. I believe it's 23 locations we have so far, with 16 locations rather, with 23 polling stations.
Meanwhile, Director of Prisons, Acting Nicklon Elliott, also spoke with the media outside the Camp Street prison in Georgetown.
Voting this morning started at all the prison locations at 6 o'clock. We did not have any concerns from the staff and those persons who would have started the process. In total, we have 493 persons who are registered to vote. 63 of them will not be voting because of one person contesting in that locality area, and we have 430 persons who are expected to cast the votes today.
Also observing the process at the Camp Street prison was GCOM's Commissioner Says Gunraj, who noted that there were a few minor hiccups which were expected.
So far as seeing the execution of the preparation of the work plan, etc., that we have put in place for a long time now. As you know, these local government elections were due for some time, and for various reasons, not lastly, what were trite issues that were raised by members of the opposition and the commission all of which thankfully have now been resolved by the courts.
The voting process was observed by various party agents and officials of GCOM. The rest of the country votes on Monday, June 12th. Reporting for the newsroom, I am Isanella Patwo.
And we move across now to Barbados. Now, this is an interesting story. The 2023 sugar harvest closed with initial numbers showing a significant increase in production over the last year. Final figures are still being tabulated, but after a meeting at the Port Vale factory in Barbados, the word from official points to the best harvest in recent years. Let's take a look at this.
Port Vale factory manager Marlon Monroe and other sugar officials were in an upbeat mood as the final canes of the 2023 harvest were being offloaded at the St. James factory. When CBC caught up with him, he was accompanied by Chief Executive Officer of the Barbados Agricultural Management Company, Orlando Arthurly, Production Manager Shanice Stevenson, and Chief Engineer Bruce Gopal. While noting the season had its challenges, Mr. Monroe gave the thumbs up to the Barbados Workers Union, the Sugar Industry Staff Association, and the workers who made this year's crop the success it was.
Our overall sugar production, we're up overall last year's production. The production manager will speak to those figures. And as indicated by the CEO, we are receiving our last canes today, cross the rail bridge this evening. And then we were going to final boil off, and that's where we are for this year's crop.
Ms. Stevenson said the good fortunes this year was also the result of a higher quality of cane coming into the factory. She drew reference to previous crops.
Last year's crop, we would have seen purities of around just over 70%. This year's purities were up to over 80%, which would have translated to an increase in sugar production of over 38% compared to last year's crop. This year, we're averaging just about over 10 on the TCTS compared to last year's, which would have been around 12. So we've seen that decrease in the tonnage of cane that it takes to produce a ton of sugar. And molasses-wise, we have seen an increase in that also due to the increase in the cane that we have received this year. 6,600 tons compared to the 6,300 tons that we would have received last year.
She added that it was a team effort.
To date, we have received just over 108,000 tons of cane compared to last year, which our crop finished at 93,000 tons, just over 93,000 tons of cane, a 16% increase. So overall, we would say that this crop has been tremendous. I would like to thank all those who participated. It has been a team effort. This year's crop would have seen its challenges compared to every other crop, but with teamwork, the grace of God, we managed to get through it like every other crop.
Sugar officials say the figures given today are expected to go up as the books are closed in a few days. Trevor Thorpe, CBC News.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now break for WESN's News on the Hour. And when we return, AM Prime will welcome its final guest for this morning's edition of the program. We'll be right back after this. This is your WESN News on the Hour. Thank you for joining us. Here are the headlines. Travelers from Trinidad and Tobago now qualify for visa-free travel to Canada. Library man held with loaded pistol at home. Women's CPL 2023 final to be hosted in TNT. In regional news, Ghana elected to non-permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council. And internationally, China says war with US would be unbearable disaster. With the details, I'm Keaton Shaw. Trinidad and Tobago has been named among 13 countries that are under the Electronic Travel Authorization Program. Travelers from these countries who have either held a Canadian visa in the last 10 years or who are currently holding a valid United States non-immigrant visa can now apply for an ETA. A media release states effective today, Eligible travelers from these countries can benefit from the program. One pistol and a quantity of ammunition was seized by officers of the Southwestern Division during an anti-crime exercise conducted in the La Brea district on Monday. The exercise was conducted between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. on June 5th, during which task force officers and the K9 unit proceeded to Sobo Village, La Brea, where they conducted a search of the home of a 23-year-old suspect. During the search, one Austria Glock 19 pistol, loaded with a magazine containing 14 rounds of ammunition, was seized. The suspect, who was at the house at the time of the search, was arrested in connection with the find. Investigations are ongoing. The 2023 edition of the Women's CPL will feature 7 matches, as opposed to 4 in the inaugural season last year. The league will be underway on August 30th, with the final taking place on September 10th in Trinidad and Tobago. The sides taking part are the Trinbago Knight Riders, Barbados Royals, and the Guyana Amazon Warriors. Barbados will serve as the other venue for the tournament. Minister of Sport and Community Development Shamfa Cujo said, "The government is pleased to partner with the Caribbean Premier League to host the final match of the 2023 Women's CPL." In regional news, the President of Guyana, Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali, hailed Guyana's election as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council for 2024-2025. In a statement, Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali said Guyana is honored and humbled by the confidence that has been expressed by the international community in electing us to this most important position of the responsibility on the global stage. In international news, China's defense minister has said war with the US would be an unbearable disaster for the world in his first major speech since taking on the role. At a security summit, General Li Shangfu said some countries were intensifying an arms race in Asia, but he said the world was big enough for both China and the United States, and the two superpowers should seek common ground. Earlier, the US accused a Chinese warship of carrying out unsafe maneuvers in the Taiwan Strait. The US Navy said a Chinese destroyer had sailed near one of its destroyers on Saturday and forced it to slow down to avoid a collision. And that's news to the hour here on WESN. I'm Keaton Shaw. Thank you for watching. We'll have more for you at the top of the hour. Welcome back to AM Prime, and thank you for staying with us this morning as I welcome my next guest to speak about the judicial process here in Trinidad and Tobago overall in executing any approach to dealing with crime, more so with warnings against a militarized approach to dealing with crime here in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm joined by the coordinator of the Criminology Department at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus, Dr. Randy C. Prasad. He's with us via Zoom. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
We're doing well, sir. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Well, in spite of all of government's efforts to try and deal with this situation here of crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago, would it be fair to suggest it's an unrelenting plague?
Oh, definitely. Not just unrelenting, but definitely getting worse. And I think it has to do with the approaches that we've been taking over the years. While we've been focusing very heavily on the suppressive approaches, meaning the prisons, the courts, etc., we realize that by itself isn't enough. And if the crime trends really don't represent a wake-up call at this point, then I don't know what else would. Because definitely statistics show, for especially violent crimes, that there has been an increase over time.
Now, when we speak about a militarized approach to dealing with crime, especially as it relates from a police service, precisely what does that mean, a militarized approach?
Well, basically it means utilizing the military in the crime-fighting effort, so bringing out military personnel work us alongside with police, or perhaps even to create specialist units with military personnel to carry out certain types of operations. However, of course, the literature would generally show that this is a very dangerous thing to do. This is an approach that a lot of jurisdictions would avoid, and quite often, it leads to a lot of issues for several reasons. One has to do with the training of the military, which quite often isn't consistent with what is required for law enforcement. Law enforcement training is very different, and the approaches to law enforcement is very different compared to what the military do and the training that they receive. And not only that, the legislation isn't built as well in Trinidad and Tobago to support the use of the military in general crime-fighting efforts. And what we have seen on the international scale is quite often when you engage the military as well, it leads to a higher death toll among civilians, and quite often sometimes happens in the contexts where regimes shift from being democratic to being more dictatorial. And this is definitely something that we want to avoid.
You see, it's interesting, Dr. C. Prasad, because the more discussions I have, there are a number of individual citizens within the public domain who have expressed the need, I suppose, or they're wanting to see the military be included in more police operations here in Trinidad and Tobago. But what you're saying is that this is definitely not the solution. This fight fire with fire approach certainly does more harm rather than good. That is the complete opposite to what people are thinking or what people are expecting or hoping for.
Right. So it really depends, right? What I'm saying here is that a full-scale engagement of the military in crime control is not something that generally, the literature and the research would support. But this doesn't mean that the military can't be engaged in some kinds of efforts. Now, one of the important functions of policing has to do with deterring crime, and it has to do with the visibility of persons surveilling the environment. Once you have that happening, it really reduces the likelihood that crime will be committed. And nothing in principle is wrong with using military persons to do joint patrols and so forth to help surveil the environment. That is entirely okay, but it has to be done within reason and with very clear boundaries in terms of what the responsibilities are. So it's not necessarily a black and white case that you could simply say, across the board, a yes or no. Right? It really has to do with how the military is engaged in the fight against crime. And in principle, as long as it's done correctly and within the limits of the law, then that might be okay. And if you wanted to push it even further in terms of even, providing training that would allow the military to function in a law enforcement capacity and even amending the laws. But then again, that is something that takes a lot of effort and time, but it's certainly something that is worth exploring.
Well, I'm glad that you've actually separated both and explained both, because I know one of the things that you've raised recently is that adopting a militarized approach to policing, just so that there's clarity, is that the possibility of the violation of human rights.
Right, and that's one of the very, very serious concerns, because at the bottom of it, the military is trained to kill. They are trained to defend the sovereignty and the borders of a country. They're not trained in law enforcement and the techniques that are utilized within law enforcement. So you cannot put folks with that type of training and with the types of weapons that they have on the streets to police people. The weapons that military officers use, for example, they are designed to kill. They're very different. So I'm not saying that, of course, that the weapons that police officers have can't kill, but they're much less dangerous than the weapons that military folks carry around. So really, the gear that they have, the training that they have, the focus that they have is something that is not geared towards law enforcement, generally speaking. And quite often it could lead, to an infringement of human rights. So when you look at Trinidad and Tobago, for instance, we have approximately, for the last 3-4 years, about 50 persons per year being killed by police officers. Mind you, I'm not saying murdered here, I'm saying killed in the line of duty. And that figure could actually go up. If you look at some other places like Brazil, it's in the thousands. And other places that use the military in law enforcement, you find that the numbers are much, much higher. And the rates of deaths of civilians at the hand of law enforcement officials tends to be a lot higher. And of course, that speaks to a circumvention of due process, because it means that people might be quicker killed in the field rather than taken to court and tried. And quite often, you know, when people are taken to court and tried, we find out that they're actually innocent. And you may have innocent people being killed if you use the military in law enforcement.
I think, Dr. C. Prasad, if we can be honest with each other, what we see now in Trinidad is the general population, once allegations are made, or once an individual is a suspect, they have not been proven guilty, but rather, in the end, they might be very much innocent, as you've just pointed out. But the public now, that level of frustration is, they've already deemed this individual as guilty. You know, it's a suspect, they've gone in for questioning, but they're guilty in the public's eye. We've heard, I can tell you that, at least from the position that I've sit, and even from comments that you read on social media, even sometimes newspaper article, there is this, I suppose, the adoption of an attitude in Trinidad where we should just exterminate all these individuals. They're not necessarily proven guilty in a court of law, but you know what, they're a suspect. Police are, so let's exterminate them and whatnot. What you are suggesting this morning is that this is absolutely terrible and could, in fact, be a very big blunder, a very big negative for the judicial process and the judicial system here in TNT.
Right, and that's a very, very important point that you raise. Because the thing is, the general literature will show, and it is the case in Trinidad and Tobago, that crimes are committed by a very small proportion of persons. The vast majority of persons in Trinidad and Tobago are law-abiding. And we cannot at all circumvent judicial process. We know that judicial process takes a while to happen. Definitely we need to put things in place to speed up the judicial process, but you cannot just have a presumption of guilt as a factor upon which decisions are made. You have to have a trial in a court of law where you properly examine the facts by persons who are trained in law to make a decision of innocence or guilt. And this is one of the reasons that there is a separation of powers between the police and the judiciary. The police are not called upon ever to make a decision of innocence or guilt. They may apprehend with probable cause, and they have a good suspicion that the person that they may have apprehended could be guilty for whatever reasons. But the determination of innocence or guilt really happens by a completely independent body, meaning the judiciary. They look at the circumstances and they make a decision. And the reason for that separation of powers is to ensure that there isn't a miscarriage of justice, because by the mere fact that the police arrest somebody and bring them, you know, charge them and so forth, it implies that they already presume guilt. And the thing is, if we go down that particular path, one, we have to recognize that really in terms of the population, we've reached a point of desperation, and it's understandable that people would think this way. But if we go down that particular path, what it will spell ultimately is that there will be innocent people who will be hurt in the process. People who may not have committed an offense, but it looks like if they have, and they end up being punished or being killed simply because of the suspicion of having committed an offense without due process. And that's a very, very dangerous road that we do not want to go down.
Dr. C. Prasad, let's pause on that particular point. I'm going to come back to that in one moment. But another factor to consider, and I think you yourself have highlighted this many times before, the list of areas in Trinidad and Tobago that are now prone to criminal activity, that has widened. In fact, it's now said nowhere in Trinidad. If you thought you were you lived in a quiet community before, or a quiet neighborhood, it's you, your neighbors. No, that no longer exists. And you just mentioned that level of desperation. So we've touched on a militarized approach to dealing with crime, but the aspect now of citizens' frustrations and desperations. Is there the increasing every day the ever-increasing possibility of citizens wanting to take justice into their own hands simply because of that frustrations and desperation?
So you're right. So two things. One, crime does appear to be spreading. If we look at the geographic dispersion of crimes, it is spreading. If we look at the geographic dispersion of gangs, they also are increasing. There was a time that you wouldn't have found gangs in all of the divisions. They're increasing. Gangs have been linked to crime. The gangs are increasing. The crimes are increasing. Of course, not all crimes are gang-related. And as you rightly said as well, people are reaching a level of desperation that they want to take justice into their own hands. Now, that could mean several different things. If we mean persons or regular citizens carrying out what they believe to be, a just punishment, etc., that is not necessarily something that citizens should do, because then that is vigilante justice, and it's again circumvents due process. Now, this is not to say at all that citizens should not be engaged in the fight against crime. In fact, this is one of the elements that we have been missing for the longest while. That people in Trinidad and Tobago have sat back for too long. They have said that the crime problem is not my personal problem. But more and more, we are beginning to realize that crime could be knocking on any of our doors at any point in time. We're all at risk now. And what we are really seeing is people galvanizing together, coming together in neighborhoods, creating neighborhood watch groups. Even in my own neighborhood, we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to have follow-up meetings. People are coming together. They are designing patrols. They are coming up with different solutions, developing communication systems within their own neighborhood so that they can reach out to each other in case of an emergency. Surveillance systems where different people are looking at different parts of the neighborhood at different hours of the night. So the entire neighborhood is covered in terms of surveillance pretty much round the clock. Getting blow horns as a sign that they could use in case of an emergency to alert other neighbors, etc., etc., etc. So neighborhoods are coming up with strategies. They are communicating more and reaching out to the police so they get that very quick response if there should be an emergency in their neighborhood. And at the heart of any good deterrent and crime detection effect really has to do with surveillance. And we have known for a very long time that the police can't be there every single second because the police force is limited, right? And if we have the entire nation looking on and doing something, not necessarily taking justice in their own hands, but playing the part, and this is something that has been done, This is something that has been done in other countries. So playing their part to assist the police and bringing things to their attention, you find that it will create a greater deterrent effect. You find that it will improve the chances that you catch people when they go to perpetrate acts. And I will give you an example. Just recently, I was sitting in an airport in Fort Lauderdale, and maybe every 10 minutes, you kept hearing this very, very nice message about human trafficking, mentioning that it's on the rise in Florida. And if you see something suspicious, report it right away and call this number. And immediately what you have is everybody in the airport looking around at something suspicious or to see if there's something suspicious. And quite often we see things that look out of place, but we say, you know what, it's none of my business. We don't do anything about it. And that's just one example. There are a lot of examples of that. And the people of Trinidad and Tobago do need to pull together in their communities, do need to communicate with each other and become part of the apparatus that is in support of the crime fighting problem.
Dr. C. Prasad, have you seen any efforts? I mean, from your view, you would be able to analyze things a bit more different, a bit more detailed as compared to many others, given your background in criminology. Have you seen any efforts that are leading to or could lead to the tangible success in the efforts against crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yes, there have been some very good examples of that. In fact, from 2014 to 17, the Ministry of National Security, and more specifically the Citizen Security Program, implemented the Cure Violence model in Trinidad and Tobago. This is just one example I'm giving you, but there is a larger point to this. That model was implemented by a firm called Tyrus. And really it was an intervention designed to reduce gang violence. Now, it resulted in a 38.6% decline in murders and woundings and shootings in gang-affected communities in the Port of Spain area. We're talking the most difficult communities in Trinidad and Tobago, those communities with the highest levels of murders. And imagine if in 3 years you could create a 38.6% decline when murders and woundings and shootings increased by 16.4% over the same period in the rest of Trinidad and Tobago. Imagine the power of this particular model. Now, the bigger point that I'm getting at is that things can be done. There are things that can be done. Criminological literature has a wealth of things, but the things that have proven to be successful have certain features. One is that they are data-driven. You collect data and you design interventions around them. And secondly, very, very important, things that really get at the root causes, whether you're talking proximate causes or more distal root causes of the crime problem, things that really tackle crime at the source, whether it's issues in the family, issues in the community, drug use, educational issues, lack of access to jobs. Those are the things that will take people out of engagement in crime. And unfortunately, these are the things that we are not doing, right? We are not doing these things on a systematic basis at all. So just to give you the example, the Citizen Security Program in the Ministry of National Security is no longer operative. And that was the one part of the Ministry of National Security that really placed emphasis on prevention. And of course, that the CSP was supported with Inter-American Development Bank funding. And not surprisingly, when the funding came to an end, despite all of the great work of CSP was no more. And it's really sad that successive governments have chosen to go down the line of placing so much emphasis on the suppressive approaches. And I'm not saying that anything is wrong with the suppressive approaches, meaning policing and the courts and the prisons and all of that. That is an essential part of it. But they have placed 90% or more of the emphasis there. And these things never get at the root causes, which means that they leave the drivers of the problem intact. And as long as you don't touch the drivers of the problem is going to persist and you're going to be struggling. The police is going to be struggling. The courts are going to be overwhelmed. The prisons are going to be overflowing. And the crime problem is going to keep coming at you. And if after 20 years of increasing crime, we still cannot see that, then we're in a very, very bad position.
Now, you've mentioned many things there. With the time that I've left, I want to touch on a couple and very, very good points. I mean, you mentioned the courts being overwhelmed, even the prisons. So that raises the topic of restorative justice. But I want to go back now to the situation with the courts and the judicial system. Something was raised a couple of weeks ago, and that is the proposal of judge-alone trials here in Trinidad and Tobago. Do you believe that this will benefit the system?
Yes, this will benefit the system, but you do have to have safeguards in place. You have to define very carefully which cases will go for a judge-alone trial. And despite the transparency and the accountability in the judicial system, at the end of the day, we also very importantly have to recognize that judges are human beings. Judges could potentially be biased as well. Even though they're very learned and trained in law, there could be biases of which they themselves may be unaware. So you must put systems in place to detect, one, if there are any conflicts of interest. So if they know the person who is accused, they certainly shouldn't be adjudicating a case if they have any kind of personal relationship or friendship with somebody. And two, to put systems in place where just as jurors are screened to find out if there is potential bias in a particular case, you also screen the judge and give the judge himself or herself the opportunity to say whether they think they should recuse themselves from sitting in that particular position for a particular defendant each time around, each time a new defendant comes. So judge-alone trials will definitely speed up the process, but it's something that must be done very carefully and something that must be just as transparent and accountable and above all, fair to persons who are accused.
I'm glad that you phrased it the way you did, because what it does is that it points to the fact that there are benefits to it, of course. But judge-alone trials are not without problems. They're not without the negative. You know, human beings as well, and the potential for bias. But if we were to try and overall say what kind of effect it could have, not will, but it could have on the existing system, could we say that it can have overall a positive effect if we were able to actually deal with everything that you just mentioned?
Yes, I say overall it would definitely have a positive effect by the simple fact that it would speed up trial. And I would add that we should possibly very strongly consider wider use of plea bargaining and inform defendants about it, let them understand what it is, let them know that they could engage in plea bargaining. That is something that really reaches a point of a verdict very, very quickly and circumvents the need for an entire long, drawn-out trial. So that is something as well that needs to be considered very strongly for much wider use. And I think even just those two things alone would make a dramatic change in the turnaround that we experience in the court system.
Dr. C. Prasad, I want to thank you very much for your time this morning and for joining me on AM Prime. A wide-ranging discussion, certainly a lot more that we could have got into. I can only hope that we will be able to do such again in the near future. But for now, sir, take care and keep well.
Thank you. Enjoy your morning. Bye-bye.
You too, sir. Have a great day. Dr. Randy C. Prasad at the Criminology Department of the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus, speaking to us this morning about, well, as I said, a wide-ranging interview, a militarized approach to policing, as well as why it is this is not the solution to dealing with the crime problem here in TNT. Also speaking about efforts that actually have seen tangible success in the fight against crime and what's going on there in particular once more. And finally concluding on judge-alone trials here in TNT. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for AM Prime for today. My name is Keaton Shaw, and thank you very much for joining me. It's always a pleasure. I do wish you a great day ahead, a wonderful day, maybe a productive one. And as always, my only wish for you is to always be the rational individual, be the more mature individual in dealing with any situation. Always be kind, always be respectful, try to be empathetic and understanding, and most of all, keep calm, live your life in a positive way, because we can make Trinidad and Tobago a bit sweeter. We have to make that effort, though. Anyway, enjoy your holiday tomorrow, and the Corpus Christi's greetings goes out to the Catholic and Christian communities. And for the rest of TNT, use it as a day of rest and possibly, if you can squeeze it in, reflection. That is very important. But this is my final AM Prime for about a couple of weeks. I shall see you at the end of June, and I hope in the meantime you enjoy the programs that will be piloted by a familiar face. I wouldn't say more than that for now. I will see you again in 2 weeks' time, but I'm Keaton Shaw. Until then, bye-bye.
The perfect mix of news, current affairs, talk, debate, mature discussions, comedy and sports. Only at WESN, the content capital.
What's the best way to grab the attention of viewers? Please exercise more patience. You have to be kidding me.
Doing what we do best. I'll say at the very least it's a conspiracy of laziness against the people.
Join me, Keaton Shaw.
And me, Sean Michael Small, for Talking Point.
Weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
We go in-depth on the trending issues and engage the most controversial newsmakers
as we get them to account to the people for their actions.
You can't go to the government with nothing. You can't go to cabinet with an empty hand, with a wish. I'm glad